The next witness is Acting Senior Sergeant Meacham King. He's present in the body of the court, and I call Acting Senior Sergeant Meacham King.
Thank you.
Your Honour, before the witness is called,
Yes, Mr. Sutton.
I need to address you on the position of my client.
Yes.
Yesterday, my colleague, Ms. McNally, told you that Mr. Coleridge had told the Supreme Court that Mr. Bowens would not be called today and that he would be called in the future. Mr. Coleridge denied it, and what we will do in due course is we'll put before you the record of what happened in the Supreme Court, and we'll put before the Supreme Court the record of what happened here, so that there can be no dispute.
Well,
But
it's not relevant to anything that I'm considering.
No, but
And as I understand it, the proposition was that it was likely that your client wouldn't be called.
yes, all I want to do is lead up to a proposition about how we should deal with this. And I'm going to, I know your Honour is pressed for time, but I'm asking you for 10 minutes to address you on my suggestion of how we should deal with this, and I need to explain to you why.
Deal with what? What are you asking me to deal with?
Well, let me give you I'll give you the final line, and then I'll come back to justify it.
Okay.
We are being told that tonight a decision will be taken about whether Mr. Bowens will be called tomorrow.
Yes.
Your Honour, we are under very strict cost constraints. We also made arrangements. We were set to give evidence yesterday. We kept a day today. We were due to fly out tomorrow. My colleague, Ms. McNally, has a 10-month-old baby where she's had to make arrangements. We are being rolled over and rolled over. If your ladyship is indicating facially that you are impatient.
Indicating that I disagree with the proposition that you were being rolled over and rolled over, because I know the extensive efforts that have taken place to prepare witness lists and plans for witnesses, taking into account the various availability of witnesses, together with all the various availabilities and needs of the many counsel who are at this table. And that is continuing to occur, and it is not the case that needs and inconveniences are being ignored. In fact, they're being considered as best we can, but the outcomes don't suit everybody all the time. There are just too many different moving parts and too many different needs to ensure that everybody has the desired outcome.
Your Honour has considered that in conjunction with counsel for you. You have not heard me in respect of our position. And your Honour is indicating short shrift with me, and I'm asking you, I asked you for 10 minutes. I want you to explain to you what our difficulty is. That's all. I'm not trying to...
Have you explained it to counsel assisting?
I have explained it to counsel assisting. I got a call this morning at 8:46 to say we're not calling Bowens today. I also asked counsel for assisting whether, bearing in mind that the court wasn't starting until later, we couldn't dispose of this issue at 9:30 so that we could see where we are. The approach appears to be we ambushed counsel assisting yesterday by going to court, and we have to take the consequences for that. Now, I just want to tell you what the consequences are for us, because we would like to, what I was hoping was to make an arrangement that I wouldn't need to address you. So our position is this. First of all, we may be told tomorrow that Bowens is not being called. That means that today and tomorrow are wasted costs, wasted time where other arrangements have to be made, etc. If he is called tomorrow, we roll into Friday. If he's called on Friday, we've got to be here for the weekend. Now, all I want to put to you is that we come back on another suitable time. Bowens wants to testify. Whatever the counsel assisting may want to get from him, he wants to help you about the need for an IRT or an IRT equivalent. He wants to do that. Now, one of the difficulties, which I understand, which counsel assisting told you yesterday, was that she was faced now with having to deal with Bowens on two separate occasions. Firstly, in relation to the non-penalty privilege issues, and then at a later stage, in respect of the penalty privilege issues. Now, what I want to put to your honour is two things. First of all, if you want Bowens to come back on a date other than the one I'm going to suggest, then he'll have to come back on that date. But what I wanted to suggest to you is there is a date for the issue that was in court, in the Supreme Court yesterday. There is a date for that. When that matter is heard, then we will be in a position to hear Bowens on both issues. That is my suggestion. It's a suggestion which takes, but even the other suggestion, all I'm saying to you is, why do we have to languish here away from the personal aspects of home, which I've mentioned, at great cost to our client, etc. We're saying our client will come and give evidence, and we're asking for an accommodation which takes into account, even last week, we wrote to counsel assisting and said, can you assure us that Bowens will be called on Tuesday? And the response was, this is the timetable. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm trying to reach a situation which is reasonable. So my suggestion to you is, please release us today, please release Sergeant Bowens today, and let us come back at a suitable time.
Is there any possibility that Sergeant Bowen will be reached today?
Not today, Your Honour. If I just might address you briefly. Up until yesterday, your counsel assisting team had no notice that any point would be taken in relation to any penalty privilege issue. And of course, that would make sense because in my respectful submission, there is likely no penalty privilege issue with Sergeant Bowens, or at least there may not be, because what we heard from Dr. Freckleton is that in relation to the text messages, which seem to have excited the objection, those matters have been dealt with again previously by the Northern Territory Police, and there is no proposal to deal with them again. And that is on the record now, and it can be placed on the record. It could have been dealt with when Sergeant Bowens got up to give evidence. Last week, we received correspondence from Miss McNally addressed to me on the 13th of October, enclosing the tickets for Sergeant Bowens' trip, indicating that she did not know until this morning that he was scheduled to land in Alice Springs at noon on Monday, the day he was currently scheduled to testify. So she says, would you mind moving him to Tuesday, the 25th of October, to overcome this position? I really do appreciate the enormity of your task, but what with possible injury time and the availability of other witnesses in Alice Springs to do a swap, I request that we move Lee to the Tuesday. So that was done to accommodate Sergeant Bowens. The witnesses from Tuesday were moved to Monday, and he was listed on Tuesday. Yesterday, at around 3 o'clock, we found out his proposal to go to the Supreme Court. Of course, that wasn't it. I used the term ambush in my discussions this morning with Mr. Suttner because that's what it was. We had no idea that that was coming, and of course that causes great inconvenience that the inconvenience is caused as a result of this late notice to the Supreme Court. I am not suggesting for a moment that Sergeant Bowens is not entitled to claim any privilege that he wants to or to test the legal opportunities for him. But it needs to be done in a proper, orderly way. And in my respectful submission, there was no reason not to give counsel assisting notice of that. He then could have got in the witness box, we could have called all the evidence that we could from him, and he could have taken the objection at an appropriate time. In my respectful submission, what happened with no notice was entirely premature. And it put Mr. Coleridge in a difficult position and this court in a very difficult position, because with no notice, Mr. Coleridge went in an effort to assist the court, but he was not in a position to take instructions. In those matters, it is the normal course that Your Honour would have a submitting appearance and the Solicitor General may appear. But it is abundantly clear from even the email that was received from the Supreme Court Associate that no full instructions could be taken. What I'm told is that Mr. Coleridge informed the Supreme Court that it was unlikely, in his view, that Sergeant Bowens would be called this week, but he did that without any instruction and without any ability to assist the Supreme Court. He made it clear that he was not in a position to do so in a more complex way because of the short notice. It is a shame that Mr. Suttner and Ms. McNally are personally inconvenienced as a result, but the suggestion that counsel assisting has not tried to accommodate them is nonsensical. The parties at this bar table from the very beginning, long before Mr. Suttner and Ms. McNally were involved, have been urged to communicate with counsel assisting and to come to this court in a way that is genuinely respectful and helpful. As Your Honour knows and has been explained many times, these proceedings are being summarised at the end of this week, and then we're having them interpreted in the Walpurgis language. And the family of Kumanjayi Walker and the community, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, are very interested in these proceedings. But as Your Honour knows, the communities of Yundamu and the communities for the families that Kumanjayi belong to are following these proceedings with great interest. And we are trying to ensure that they make sense, that it does not appear to families or communities that information is being hidden from them, and that they can participate in these proceedings in a way that is meaningful. And I urge again all parties to communicate with counsel assisting well ahead of time if there are legal issues that they want to ventilate, and that we do so in a way that is calm and respectful and appropriate. In my respectful submission, what we should do is get on with the witnesses this morning. We have Sergeant Meacham Kim ready to go. As I explained to my learned friend Mr. Suttner this morning, because of the late notice, I wish to consider the position carefully with Sergeant Bowens. I wish to take further advice about it, and I need to do that calmly, not in a manner that's hurried. And I'll advise him at the earliest possibility.
But at least we can advise that he's not going to be called today.
Oh yes, Your Honour, and I have advised that, and that was the email that went out this morning to parties, and I, as an act of courtesy, appropriately called Mr. Suttner before the email went out so that he would know at the earliest point that I did, or thereabouts, that his client would not be called today.
So, Mr. Suttner, even before you got to your feet, there's clearly been detailed and ongoing consideration in relation to the application that was made yesterday and how that might impact the timing of the calling of witnesses. I am still considering that situation along with counsel assisting, and we will advise you as soon as possible when Sergeant Bowens will be called, taking into account the indication that you have provided, but it might not be until the end of court today when we've got an opportunity to properly consider the matter. But certainly he's not going to be called today, and you certainly do not need to remain in the courtroom today.
A, I appreciate that, Your Honour. B, I do want to make the point that I appreciate, first of all, assistance given in the past by your counsel, and I appreciate the efforts that she has had. We also do understand the impact that our application had yesterday. All we are saying is there are other days. There are other days. Instead of making us languish, let us come back on it at a suitable time.
I've heard you, Mr.
As
Sumner,
does-
and we'll deal with that once we've had an opportunity to
Thank you.
consider it. But I won't be using further court time today to consider it. I'll be considering it outside of our sitting hours.
As it pleases you.
Mr. Coronial.
Or Acting Senior Sergeant Meacham King.
Sorry, is it Acting Senior Sergeant?
Oh, just Sergeant will be fine, Your Honour.
Sergeant?
Sergeant will be fine to make it easier. Yep.
No, it's not easy. I'm trying to understand. I just didn't hear Mr. Colbert. I didn't quite hear it. Is it Acting Senior Sergeant?
I was acting senior sergeant the weekend, but I'm back to sergeant duties now.
Oh, okay. All right. Sergeant, before you commence your evidence, do you promise to tell the truth to the court?
I do.
Thank you.
Sergeant, can I ask you to restate your full name for the record, please?
Yeah, Sergeant Meacham King, register number 2120.
Now, I'm just going to identify some documents that have been provided to the coroner that you authored or are associated with. You gave a statutory declaration on the 17th of November 2019.
I believe so, yes.
Your Honour, that's 7-76. You also gave, I should say, that was a one-page document, in effect a chain of custody statement.
He probably...
Yes, yeah, I do remember that. Yep. That was taking evidence from Alice Springs back to Darwin. Yeah.
You also gave a statutory declaration on the 25th of November 2019.
That's correct.
That's 7-77, and that's a much more substantial statutory declaration that sets out your recollections of the events of the 9th, 10th and 11th of November.
That's correct.
Your Honour, also on the brief is a video at 7-77 capital B. It's a video I'll play at some point during the examination. Now, Sergeant King, can I ask you to give Her Honour a very brief career overview, where you started in the police force and where you've ended up?
Yeah, sure. So, Your Honour, I joined the police force in January 2000 and I did my training in the police academy. I moved down to Alice Springs in July of that year and I did 3 years in Alice Springs. In August 2003, I started my career at the Territory Response Group in Darwin, and until January this year, I was in that unit the whole time. And now I'm a supervisor in Casuarina Police Station.
Now, perhaps leaving to one side the training that you formally received as a member of the Northern Territory Police Force, have you from time to time done training courses outside the police force?
Yes, I've got extensive experience in training with the NT Police and other agencies, yeah.
Have you undertaken training courses in leadership, for example?
Yes, sir.
Could you tell Her Honour something about the training you've done in that area?
Outside the police force or within?
Both.
Well, within the police force, obviously, there's the leadership through rank as a senior constable to the sergeant, up to where we are now. In the Territory Response Group, there's a significant amount of leadership courses within the unit to train people up as team leaders, to tactical commanders, as well as leadership within the teams as well. I've done my firearm instructor since 2008, and I've done leadership in relation to courses there. I've done leadership course at the NT Fire Rescue Service, and I did one last week to senior firefighters who are moving on to station officers about that undertaking responsibility of moving up to that next level and what's incumbent upon them as senior managers. And also I'm with the Army Reserve, and I've done 20 years with Norfolks, and I've undertaken leadership roles as moving up to the ranks and also mentoring other people through those as well.
I'll ask you a little bit more about leadership and training leaders in a moment, but can I ask you some questions about the Territory Response Group? I'm assuming you're on to know something about the TRG, but in your own words, could you explain to everyone what the TRG is?
So the TRG is a police tactical group from the Northern Territory Police, and our main aim is for high risk and counter-terrorism operations. for active offenders and such. But we're quite unique in relation to other jurisdictions because we also cover search and rescue, close personal protection. We also do bomb response and supporting the front line in general support tasks wherever they may need to be doing. So we're pretty much a jack of all trades that if you need us to come down, we're in a position to assist you from anything from a resourcing issue for a special operation right through to someone with a firearm threatening people.
And I take it that you've been a member of the TRG for some time,
When I left in January, I'd done 18 and a half years in the unit, yes.
but you're no longer a member of the TRG?
No, that's correct.
Okay. Now, I think you mentioned that in some ways the TRG is different to specialist tactical units in other jurisdictions in Australia, and you were distinguishing, I think, between some high-risk deployments and some more general support deployments. Is that a sensible distinction between the two types of work the TRG does, high-risk and general support operations?
Yes. Distinct differences.
Can you tell your Huron something about what a high-risk deployment would generally involve?
Well, high-risk deployment generally revolves around the risk to people's lives, so to speak, or there's a risk to critical infrastructure. So there's the consequence of the incident is high and the likelihood is probable or higher.
That might involve things like large-scale civil unrest, an active shooter, a siege, things of that nature.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Can you tell Her Honour something about the types of general support you might give as a member of the TRG to a police station, let's say a remote police station?
Yeah, sure. We could be tasked to go down and support a operation such as a large football carnival where they want extra police to come down and help with that. There could be operations for traffic or drug-related matters where they want to go down and do an operation in the area with roadblocks. General support also includes search and rescue, where we've got a missing person. We'll go down and help do the search and rescue operation, support local frontline in managing that resource.
I think one of the police officers who's given evidence thus far has used the expression force multiplier. Is that an expression that you use in the TRG to describe the type of general support you give?
Yeah, it can be. It's a difficult word, that force multiplier, but yes, it is. It's more so of extra police on the ground with a higher level of training, with a different set of skills, more so with general support.
So it's not just about having more boots on the ground, it's having more boots, but officers who have a higher degree of training, specialist skills, discipline, etc.
Yeah, so when we send people to general support, they're normally accompanied by a team leader and they're used to working in environments. A lot of them are bush police officers who understand how to work in remote communities. So going forth, they can be left to do a certain task. And with search and rescue, obviously, they are the experts in search and rescue mission controllers. So they'll go forward and coordinate the search because they undertake a significant amount of training to get those skills up, as opposed to frontline in normal settings don't receive those training.
Spoken a little bit about search and rescue, but is the TRG ever asked to assist in the apprehension and arrest of more complex or serious offenders?
Yes, we've been asked to do that. Yes.
And would they generally be categorised as a general support deployment or a high-risk deployment, or does it depend?
It would depend on the risk assessment. So we'll get a request for services and it comes to our unit. And our Tech Intel cell will conduct a risk assessment on that person or those persons that are being to be apprehended. We'll determine the risk from there and then we'll categorise it and send up the chain of command and get approval to go. And if it's a general support task, there could be a case of we've got people in the community or I've got some links to violence but not exhibiting violence now, or there might be people that they want us to help arrest due to other stations such as Alice Springs or Katherine who don't have the resources. Can we go out and help them and go out there without affecting frontline capability in those areas? So we'll go back and support them and arrest them.
I don't want to assume that you're very familiar with the evidence that's been given in the Coronial Inquest, but are you aware that Kumanjayi Walker on the 6th of November 2019 threatened two police officers in Yundamur with knives?
Yes, I was aware of it.
If you were provided with information of that kind by local members, Is that the kind of I suppose, arrest that the TRG might from time to time become involved in?
Yes, definitely.
And maybe it's difficult on the basis of that single piece of information, but are you able to say whether that would be a general support deployment or a high-risk deployment?
Well, again, we would get the TAC Intel cell to do a risk assessment on that individual, and we would look at Kumanjayi's history right through to his involvement with police, and any violent matters and the rest of it, and then we would make our assessment from there, whether it was high risk or general support, and we would have responded accordingly.
So you would need all of that information.
Yes.
You do the risk assessment.
Yep.
And then you decide whether the deployment would be general support or high risk.
Yeah, we would make our recommendation. That's including speaking to the OIC and the members involved down there from their dealings with it as well.
I want to ask you some questions about training. I appreciate that there are some sensitivities when talking about training, the training of a group like the TRG. I'm not going to ask you to disclose tactical details, things of that nature, but can you give Her Honour a very general sense of the type of training you receive when you join the TRG?
So they have to pass a selection course to be accepted, and when they come into the unit, there's approximately 4.5 months of basic courses they undertake, and they have to pass each course to move on to the next one. Once they pass those courses, we consider them to be a basic operator that can be deployed on high-risk operations. And then from there, they move into specialist skills, and those specialist skills may be dictated by their character or aptitude that they have a natural interest in, or it could be a case of we have a deficiency in that area due to people leaving, and we'll move them into there. Once they move on to their specialist skills, they'll get some exposures as 2 ICs on operations, normally general support operations. If they show the right attributes and we think they're ready through experience and otherwise and maturity, they'll then undertake a team leader course. And from that team leader course, they'll then be ready to support high-risk operations. Ideally, we'll give them general support operations to give an understanding and let them mature and gain experience and get some exposure to that leadership role with some mentoring where required. And then they'll get to move on to higher level stuff for high-risk operations if they determine that we think they're ready.
And how, if someone has the right attributes,
Yeah.
and is progressing well, sort of what time frame would it take to get through that training from the entering and doing the first 4 to 4.5 months of courses through to someone having the competency to be a team leader of a high-risk operation?
We wouldn't be looking at putting one in a team leader course for at least 2 years. But there are some exceptions to that, Your Honour, that if we have a person who's done extensive acting sergeant roles in remote communities or on the road, frontline, they've already been exposed to that, so they probably have a bit of a step up. Where it gets tricky is that they don't have much exposure to what the unit does. So it's okay to be a sergeant in frontline, but you're not a sergeant, so to speak, in that unit because they're doing different things. But in answer to your question, I would say they wouldn't be looking at being developed to a 2IC at least to 2 year. At the 2 year mark, we would start seeing them and giving some opportunities to step up and do some things, maybe some admin aspects. And then probably around about the 4 year mark. And where that comes into is that there's a national course called the Australian New Zealand Counter-Terrorism Group Police Tactical Group Skills Enhancement Course. And that is run every year, and we send 4 police officers from a police tactical group from every state and jurisdiction to a location. They spend 2 weeks training, and that provides us the capability to be interoperability. So we have big operations like G20 or CHOGM or a national counter-terrorism incident like Link Cafe. They can call us and we can send our members interstate to work together, and we're all working off the same page. Once they attend that course and it shows that they're ready to do that, that's when we start looking at them to move into an instruction role as an assistant instructor, so they understand how to teach. And once they know how to teach, they understand the skills they're teaching, then we start giving the opportunity to be the team leader. Because a big component of that unit as a team leader, you have to run the team in relation to training as well. 90% of our work is training. We do the operations, obviously. And in order to run the training, you need to understand how to train your members and counsel them when there's things going on in relation to skill. So if we can get them as an assistant instructor, then move them on to an instructor and they're competent in that area and they've had a bit of leadership, then we'll start developing them to be in charge of those guys in an operational area. It's quite intensive and it takes a lot of time, and we invest heavily in our staff, and it's challenging with workload, but I would have to say it's a very sound structure, and we've developed some really good people, so some really good skills over time.
Can I ask you, it does sound like there's a very structured process for monitoring and then progressing
Yes.
members of the TRG. How do more senior members of the TRG, team leaders, trainers, the IC, the Tier 2 IC, how do they monitor the progress of the more junior officers? What does that actually involve? Are there interviews? Are there tests? Is it kind of ad hoc, just checking in with people?
So are you talking about when they're ready to move on, or a week, month by month basis, or?
Perhaps let's just focus on when they're ready to move on, but I will ask you on a week by week, month by month basis as well.
So the first thing, and I've spent time as the OIC for a number of years, the first thing we do is speak to the sergeant and say how they're going, what they're liking. You'll go away for every job we do, we come back, we have a debrief. We talk about what went wrong, what went right, what we can do better, how things. It's all about the education after an incident and how we can implement new things in training to develop efficiencies. Well, the OIC will sit down with the team leader, whether it's a sergeant or not, said how'd that job go, and if we've got new people coming up, we'll ask them how do they perform, and then over a period of time you'll get a picture that this member is actually quite good and he's showing good attributes to step up. They're keen, they're eager. Once we develop that, we'll probably bring them in and they'll have a chat with them and say, look, you're showing some good signs of stepping up. Are you interested in that leadership role, or do you want some more time on the floor? And sometimes I'll say, look, I'm not really comfortable right yet. I think I've got some more development to do. We'll say why and how, and we'll give them an opportunity to do it. Other times they'll come in and say, I want to do it, and we'll say, we're not quite ready yet. And we'll give them some opportunities in training and exercises, or more opportunities on operations under some mentoring of a good 2 ICs. We may put them as a team leader with a very senior member to be with them to provide counsel and mentoring on the job. Or we'll say to them, I'm happy to give you these sort of left and right of arc, but if it goes out of that, you need to call me back in Darwin and run some ideas past me so I can pick your brains and make sure you're going down the right path. Ultimately, we're a small unit, we know each other really well, we work together very well, so it's easy to determine where those people are, but we'll always give them an opportunity if they want to step up, and we'll try and develop them from there.
What if you, as OIC, 2IC team leader, identify that someone's got a deficiency in a skills area? What's the response in those circumstances? Is it you just take them aside? Is there a formal process for addressing it?
It's always informal through the sergeant first. Ultimately, the sergeant's responsible for the people on his team or their team. They'll talk to them and say, first thing we'll ask, what's going on at home? Is there issues at home? And we'll determine whether that's a problem. Then we'll talk to them about why we think there's a problem. We'll say, look, we're noticing these traits, what's going on? And we'll determine what that is the issue first. And then after that, we'll tell them where we're seeing deficiencies and allow them an explanation as to why, or whether they even acknowledge the fact they're doing those things wrong. And then from there, it's just a matter of just implementing things in place to curb any behaviour we may see as an issue, or curb any incidents, or develop them through training. And
Does the TRG do anything to ensure that members of the TRG remain suitable for deployment, medically suitable for deployment, psychologically and physically?
Yeah, it's a good question. So probably about 6 years ago, I reached out to ESS and I started to arrange out for the police or ESS unit to come to our unit every 6 months to talk to the members. And it wasn't so much that we had concerns where they were, it was about building that rapport and that familiarity with those people. So if we were involved in a critical incident and the person turned up, they would know who that person was. There was already a rapport. So we started the inroad to that, in relation to that. Next question.
Would there be an expectation if a member of the TRG was suffering from a relatively significant psychiatric condition, would there be an expectation that they would bring it to the attention of their senior officer? So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
You would need to know, I know that these things are private, but your expectation as a leader of a tactical unit would be that you'd know these things so that you could make a risk assessment when deploying a member. Is that right?
Yes, definitely. If we had concerns for a member or they were going through, say, a marriage breakup or some custody issues, we would talk to them. And then we will take in consideration if I'm going to deploy that member on a critical job where there's an extreme amount of stress and they're already under stress, can they perform or what? I'm going to put them in a position. Now, we will always offer the member an opportunity of that thinking, saying, look, we're worried about you, we're concerned, we're going to put you in some positions. 9 times out of 10, they'll be honest and say, yeah, I wouldn't mind a bit of a break if you can. Other times, operationally, we don't have a choice. If we've got something like the Hoffman shooting, and I need everybody because the public is in critical danger. But we would talk to them and we would manage that as best we can, with effective consultation with that member.
From time to time, police officers, and I'm assuming TRG members, might be the subject of disciplinary investigations or even criminal investigations. Is there a process for monitoring that? Would that affect their eligibility for deployment?
No, not really. That'd come up down to the superintendent. If there's a complaint against police or an investigation, the OIC attends a monthly meeting about all complaints against police about members under their command. There'll be consultation with the superintendent as to whether that person is fit for duty for certain matters. If they weren't, well, that's normally dictated higher. Sometimes the OIC will get some discretion in managing that, but 9 times out of 10, they're very resilient members. They crack on with the job. They know there's an investigation underway and they know they'll be professional in the next one.
Just to confirm, it's the OIC of the TRG would have a monthly meeting with which superintendent?
It's with his superintendents, all the superintendents and the commander, yeah.
So if someone was the subject of a criminal investigation, there would be at least a discussion, you would hope, between the OIC of the TRG and the superintendent about whether they were suitable for deployment.
Oh, definitely. And if a complaint or a matter came in between those monthly matters, that would happen as well. We're not waiting a month to find out. We'd be informed in the first instance. We'd talk about the implications on the unit and on the member, especially that member has a specialist skill. And then from there, we would work out whether we could use them and how we could use them or whether it even affected them at all.
Now, this may sound like a silly question, but would it be clear at any given point in time who was and who wasn't a member of the TRG?
Yes, definitely.
And would it also be clear at any given point in time who the OIC was?
Yeah, there's no disillusion who the OIC was at the time.
And right down through the command structure to IC team leaders, they're clearly designated positions.
The sergeants are designated positions. The team leaders can be people who are acting that role or just senior members who completed the team leader course or someone we may seem as suitable. For example, we might be doing a close protection job and the person hasn't done the team leader courses, but he might have done the CPP course or the national close protection course, which dictates he'll be able to run that close protection activity or that operation.
So is it determined operation by operation who the team leader is?
Yes, so we may have an operation, for example, at Port Keats, and we have members who've worked at Port Keats. So we might send a team leader out there who'd worked out there before because they have a good rapport with the community, they know the layout, or a team leader who'd been to a community before. Or it might be a case, this is the lower end of the scale, low risk, good development opportunity for someone to go. So each case is based on its own merit and in consultation between the OIC and the sergeant. We have an on-call team and there's always a sergeant on-call with others. And normally the on-call sergeant is the one that will go to all incidents. And we may look at it and go, well, this isn't really a matter we would send the on-call team to because we want to maintain that high-risk capacity for the whole of the Northern Territory. So we would say, well, we can give this to another sergeant or another team leader to go to leave the on-calling. But the on-call sergeant would be the one that, as an OSC, I would speak to and say, we've got this job, we're doing this is the way I look at it, have a look, what do you think, go away and come back to me who you want to send and how you want to do it, to give them some responsibility in leadership and decision making. Then they would come back to me and I would either agree or disagree. There are some instances where I'd say, no, you're taking these people for whatever reason, every now and again, but it's a consultation process, ideally. And the only time I guess it would be a little bit less consultation would be the urgency of deployment. If we had to get there quickly, then people around the office, get your gear, you're in the wing, get there, get going now, so to speak.
And the planning still goes on behind the scenes when they're en route.
Planning never stops.
Yeah.
And
if you put together a team, it is clear that who is allocated as the team leader.
yes,
And the team leader will not necessarily be the most senior in rank. You
That-
could, for example, have a team leader who you're developing and have a more senior person there acting as mentor or for some other reason.
Yes, and a classic example would be a search and rescue incident. We may send a sergeant out there to run the team, but the senior constable is a search and rescue coordinator. So they're in charge of where the resources are allocated and how that search is run, but the sergeant's at a higher rank. So there will be some respect and some consultations. The sergeant may look after the HR issues, the rostering issues, the overtime issues, and any discipline issues, so to speak, but the senior constable as a SARMAC would look after the operation per se of how resources are deployed and how that operation is undertaken because they've got the skills.
I want to ask you some questions. This may sound like a silly one, but would you describe the TRG as a disciplined unit?
Highly disciplined, yes.
Why is discipline important in a tactical team like the TRG?
Well, discipline's important no matter what you do, but I guess in our sense, discipline's important is that as an operator, as a constable, you have certain situational awareness about what you do and what you are. As a team leader, as a sergeant, you have a greater situational awareness, and as a tactical commander, OSC, your situation is bigger. If we give you an instruction to do something, you may not be aware of the reasoning why we're doing it. You just need to trust us, you need to do it, and you need to do it now. So it's important that when you're told to do something, there's a lot of trust in there, and the discipline is important just generally as a paramilitary organisation. We have rank, you respond to rank, you respect rank, and you do as you're told. Now, we do encourage members to speak out. If they find something they believe is negligent or potentially unlawful, we want them to speak out. And also, if they see a better way of doing things, we want them to speak out, say, hey, did you consider this? Because we're all, more minds are better than one. But discipline, yes, it's highly regarded, it's critical, absolutely critical in that unit to maintain that.
Two words that I think you used were trust and respect. So it's fair to say that trust and respect up and down the chain of command is essential for discipline.
Yes, definitely.
How do you instill that type of discipline in the TRG? Is it something you have actual conversations about? Is it just an expectation?
I guess we're fortunate when they come to the unit by doing that 4.5 months of training. I'm the instructor, you're the student. So there's a level of respect and a level of understanding that I'm assessing you for everything, from your personal attributes to your confidence through to your skills, your trainability, your confidence and your attitude. So straight away they realise that if they don't pass those courses and they don't pass well, they're not going to be in the unit anymore. We'll transfer them out. So we, right from the start, we build that trust and respect through our adult learning principles and how we treat them and how we do it. Once they finish that course, they go into teams and be trained. They're treated the same. And when they go to do operations and they see the way we lead and the way we run operations, they understand that he is the boss, she is the boss, then we will do as we're told. And they understand why it's important because they can see the outcomes of our operations.
You mentioned adult learning principles. Are they principles that are documented in the police service?
They're starting to bring it in now in the college. We went through a transition probably about 3 or 4 years ago from talking to other police tactical groups and other people that we had to change the way we taught and the way we started talking to people. The old days where we were very dictatorship in how we instructed and how we told you to do stuff, whereas now we've changed everything to try and create, the only stress we create on a student is the stress they create on themselves. So we put it back on them as opposed to stress from us. We don't yell at them anymore. We used to yell to encourage them to work harder and to get that internal controlled aggression. Now we want them to find it themselves. So the adult learning stuff is about talking to them on a level, understanding where they're coming from, giving them the opportunity to explain what they thought, and then turn around and say, well, did you think about this or this, as opposed to you were wrong, you were wrong, you were wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong. So we would go back and say, well, you were here, and what were you thinking at this time, for example? Well, do you think there's a better way of doing it? Yes, we could have gone here. Why is that? Because of this. So they're actually learning as they're going. Look, I could talk about this for hours, but reality is that by talking to them like that and treating them like that, it creates a far more bit of mutual respect. And when they don't do what they're supposed to do, we want them to feel like they let us down, as opposed to I'm telling you off because I've got rank. if that makes any sense.
I'm just wondering, those adult learning principles, where did you acquire them from?
From teaching in that unit for a long time, I saw what was happening. Then we had some people come up and run some different shooting packages and some different reality-based training packages that were being adopted. And the person running that, I arranged them to they came back up to the police force, did some more training. I got a scholarship with the army and paid for him to come up and do some more training with TRG to try and instill that. And once I saw how beneficial it was, we just started taking it on. And then once everyone else saw how beneficial it was, it just became the norm. And the people we're developing now are far better ever than what we ever saw before. They're really competent, really intuitive, and it's just worked in our favour so much. It's unbelievable. It's what we've done.
I want to ask you some kind of hypothetical questions about a deployment. Let's assume a deployment to arrest a high-risk individual. The TRG gets the call, you're in Darwin, and you're being tasked to attend a remote community behind the police air wing. Let's say you get the call from a remote sergeant, and they're saying, we need some help, we're really fatigued. What's the next thing that you would do?
Well, we wouldn't normally get the call from the remote sergeant. They would pass it to the chain of command, and normally the OIC or maybe the remote sergeant, depending where it is, will call me and say, we're thinking about putting a request for services in for TRG to come along. I said, yep, no worries. And we encourage that because then I can start understanding any impost on my current training and operational calendar. Then they will normally go through their superintendent. The superintendent will send a general support request through to my superintendent. It will come through to us. I would advise our superintendent whether the unit was in a capacity to assist, taking into consideration other operational tasks, our training commitments, and also the capability to provide the Northern Territory Police and the community a high-risk response. Then, if that was approved, then we would make contact with the OIC to determine exactly what was happening, what's going on, what they needed us for, additional things, or how long they would need us, what the accommodation was like, what we needed to bring, and all those sort of questions to enable me to form an appreciation of what our task was before I gave it to the team leader to say, this is what we've got, start putting your head towards it, work out what people you want, and go from there.
So you would try to communicate directly with the remote sergeant if possible?
Yes, definitely. We have to. We do. We must, because they're the ones requesting us. And I'm very conscious of Chinese whispers as it goes through many people. They're the one who want us to do something. Obviously, there'll be some consultation with their OIC or superintendent about what their mission focus is for that region, so to speak, to ensure we're aligned with what they want. But the OIC is critical in telling us what is happening and the reason we're going.
So once you've got a good sense of what's going on the ground, what do you do in terms of thinking, your thought process?
Well, the first thing I'm thinking about is air wing available. Are we flying, are we driving? Because the biggest issue we have in the Northern Territory is the tyranny of distance. And then it comes down to the urgency of us being there. Then it's about how many people do I send? Do I send 6 or 4 or more? And obviously the air wing can normally take 6 people with equipment, and 4 is ideal. And the impost on the unit for that. But then how long they're going for. And once I get that out around, I'm really thinking about what do you want from us? So sometimes the expectations of what we want to do isn't achievable, or it's not really a TRG task if you try to source resources from your local command first. And sometimes we're really good, but I'm really conscious about being used just because we're available and no one else is. But once I understand what the mission is, it's a matter of working out how we can achieve that.
Once you've got a sense of what the mission is and you've identified your team and you've nominated a team leader, you've identified quite a few people who've been involved at this point in time. Do you do anything to ensure that the command structure is clear between yourself, your team, the remote police, the remote sergeant, their superintendent, or is this just assumed?
No, as soon as we get an operation or a task, one of the first questions we ask is who's the police forward commander, straight away. So who is my team referring to in the first instance? So we know the chain of command.
And if the remote sergeant was the most senior officer in rank, would they ordinarily be the police forward commander?
Ordinary, yes.
What would happen if the TRG team, the team leader was more senior in rank than the remote sergeant? Would they become the forward commander?
No.
The remote sergeant would?
Yes.
And what's the reasoning there?
Well, it's not our patch, it's not our area. We're there as an assistance, we're there to be a resource to assist the local area. So I can't think of, the only time it gets a little bit clouded potentially with search and rescue operations, the SARMAC sometimes undertakes that forward commander role, but we've been pushing back on that, and it depends on a resourcing issue. I can explain that if you want, Your Honour, or move on. But no, the forward commander is a forward commander, and we work for the forward commander.
Okay. I think you said two things. You work for the forward commander, and also you try to work out what their expectation is.
Yes.
They're effectively the ones coming to you with the need.
The forward commander's in charge. Everything falls under them. They're in charge of all the resources. They're responsible for all the outcomes, and they're responsible for all of it. So if anything goes good, bad, or otherwise, it all goes to them.
When you deploy a team to a remote area, it could be that there might be disagreements between, polite disagreements between the forward commander and the TRG team about the best way to achieve the mission objective. Is that right? That happens from time to time?
Yes.
And it's perfectly all right, I take it, for a polite conversation to happen between the TRG and the sergeant.
Yes.
But I also take it that the TRG's job is to understand as best as they can what the expectation of the forward commander is of them. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Because unless they understand that expectation, they can't have a meaningful dialogue about how to achieve the mission objective. Would you agree?
Correct.
So, for example, if the police forward commander put a document in someone's hand, a TRG member's hand, and said, this is related to the mission, you would expect the TRG member to read it, understand it, so that they could have that conversation with the forward commander.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you're aware, are you not, that there is some evidence that suggests that there's been a communication breakdown, or was a communication breakdown in the Invermere Police Station on the 9th of November 2019?
Look, I've heard stories in the media, but I'm not totally familiar on exactly the circumstances.
I want to make it absolutely clear that I'm not going to ask you to weigh into the debate of where the responsibility lies, if it lies anywhere. But I want to ask you, what can the TRG do, or what does the TRG do to ensure that there aren't communication breakdowns when the TRG arrives and starts engaging with the forward commander?
So when the team leader leaves Darwin, they'll go to the OIC. The OIC will be very clear on what his expectation of that unit or that team will be. The team will land on the ground, go straight to the station, speak to the OIC, and if there's any difference between what the OIC TRG said to what the forward commander said, the team leader will ring the OIC TRG and say, boss, just let you know, I've spoken to the forward commander, things have changed a little bit, or they're saying this, are you aware of it? And someone's like, yes, sorry, yeah, there's been a change while you've been en route, because it could take hours to get there. Or no, that's not part of that. Okay, and then we'll say, where did that come from? No worries. I will speak to their boss, superintendent, or I'll advise my chain of command to report up. At this point in time, depending on the urgency, we'll say, he might go, look, I'm happy with that. That makes sense to me. Alter your plan and go with it, or hold, don't do anything, let me make some calls, I'll get back to you.
And if, for example, there was evidence that the remote sergeant had devised a plan and that plan had been approved by their superintendent, if there was to be a significant change to the plan, non-urgent change, would you expect that there'd be some communication up the chain of command?
My chain, the TRG chain of command?
No, the remote sergeant's chain of command. If their superintendent approved a mission,
Yep.
And the remote sergeant was thinking, oh, maybe we need to change the mission, would you expect them to notify their superintendent of the change?
I think it would depend if there was a drastic change. If the superintendent may give the forward commander some leeway about some bits and pieces, but I would expect that, yes, if they said they were going to do something at some time at some place and that changed, I would expect the forward commander to probably brief up and to say, just let you know, for example, the TRG unit have arrived, they've given me some advice and I've taken that on board and I think it's a better plan. I just want to run it past you, or to let you know I'm changing that plan now, we're doing this and I'm comfortable with it. Or they may ring up and say, I'm seeking your advice, sir, or ma'am, can you give me some clarity on whether you prefer to do this or that? So, yeah.
If, for example, the plan was, and I don't want to be around the bush, to effect an arrest at 5 a.m. in the morning, and if the TRG and the remote sergeant have a chat and they say, actually, this might not work for various reasons, let's do it at 7 p.m. the night before, would that be a significant enough change, a change from 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. the night before, to warrant ringing the superior officer?
Well, from my perspective as a TRG team, yes, I'd expect them to notify me that they're doing something different, because that means I might be able to get out of there early. In relation to the remote sergeant doing, I guess they would have to make an appreciation as to whether the trust or the communication level they had with their boss, as to whether they've done this before and that boss has been happy for them to do something different, or whether they would say, no, I'll brief up on this because I've been given explicit instructions to do it this way and now I'm changing it, I'm going to brief up. And we always encourage people to brief up for an awareness. So if you're going to change something, it doesn't hurt. And because there's nothing worse than if you're in a position of management and you get a phone call from your boss and it says, why did they do that? And you go, no, they didn't, they're doing this, and you didn't know about it. So I would probably say if it was a distinct change or something, you would probably err on the side of caution and just give them, and it may not be a case of seeking permission. It may just be the case of just giving them the heads up, hey, we're doing something differently, we're going to go this way, I'm comfortable with it, but just a heads up so you know.
And just when maybe you're not seeking permission, but when you have that conversation, that gives you, the superior officer, an opportunity to say, actually, there was a part of my risk assessment I didn't tell you about. There's some information you need to know before you make this decision. Is that something you might say in a conversation?
Oh,
like that?
definitely. If something else has come to light, in the example I gave you, that someone's come with a different idea, or you've received information from the community, for example, that the person you're going to get tomorrow is now needs to be today because he's about to leave, or he's doing offences now and you might change the plan, then I would transfer the risk up higher and say, what say you, sir, ma'am, do you want us to go now? And these are the reasons why.
If you were about to leave a police station, a remote police station, or the TRG was, to arrest a local Indigenous person, would you ordinarily try to take a local police member with you?
Yes, ideally, yes.
Why?
We don't know the person we're going after. A lot of times you're not going to recognise them until you get them, and also the local knowledge of which streets to where, what house you're going to. So there's been instances where members of the unit have worked in that station and know people. So in that case, they maybe go out by themselves because they've got that relationship with people to go and say, hey, we're looking for so-and-so, or we're doing this. But ideally for me, every time I've gone on an operation, I'm most insisted we take a local member with us so I can ask them questions, especially if the community is a little bit antsy at time, because there might be a sorry business, football, or other things going on, other people bringing alcohol in. I said, is this sort of behaviour usual, or what are they like? How are they receiving us, or who lives in this house, and who's this person, and where do they fit into the scheme of things? So I'll ask them. It's all part of the intelligence gathering.
Is that something that you would try to gather intelligence about at the station before you leave, whether anything's going on in the community?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Yeah, before we leave, definitely.
Is it your experience as a member of the TRG that things like funerals, footy matches, sorry business can really significantly change the dynamic in a community?
Well, it can, because you can have an excess amount of people in town, for starters. So you've got far more people in town. And also it's the mood of the community, what they're doing. So, yeah, it's important to understand what's happening in that area and how you respond accordingly.
You used the word intelligence gathering a moment ago. If you were going at some point to arrest an offender and you wanted to do a little bit of intelligence gathering, what would that involve?
Well, we look at Google Earth, obviously, and the map of the station. Every police station normally has a map of the community where the houses are. So we look at the roads to the houses, or where the road to the clinic, the road to the police station, the road to the airstrip, just to get some situational awareness of where everything is. Then if they could nominate houses where these people were going to be, then we look at, well, how can we drive in, how can we drive out? The last thing we want to do is drive into a cul-de-sac or to an area, and then a confrontation occurs and we haven't got an egress route to get out of the area. So we're looking at all of that. And then, of course, we're looking at the house themselves. Where's the front door? Where's the back door? Are there dogs there? How many people are in the house? The list can go on depending on the circumstance.
Would there be occasions where you might do a drive around the community and do some intelligence gathering?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Ideally, yes, we'd like to, but what we found when we're talking about a TRG perspective.
Yes.
So in a TRG perspective, once they know we're in town, there's a high likelihood they'll probably leave. So we have to weigh up the fact of going out for drive around and getting that situational awareness to let them, if they know we're here, they jump in cars and go. We don't get an opportunity to apprehend that. So it's a fine balance. It may be a case we might go out at night time and we won't engage with people, or we might just say, look, we just won't do anything. We'll rely on what our plan is later on, and we'll do that.
So once you disclose the additional police presence, the game might be up.
Yes.
Would
Also, in saying that, sometimes they know we're in town and they produce them to the front counter of the police station as well. So it's a double-edged sword depending on the intelligence we have at the time.
Would driving up to someone's house, jumping over the fence with all members of the TRG and standing outside the front door and telling family members we're here to grab up the offender, would that be intelligence gathering, or is that just a search?
Are they asking for the person they're after? Is that what you're saying?
That's right. If they turn up at the front door and say, we're here to arrest this person, is that what you're talking about when you describe intelligence gathering?
Look, not ideally, no, but I guess the case would be if you've been to 3 or 4 houses where you thought that person was and they're not there, then you're going to each house asking, well, then you're seeking intelligence where they are. But in reference to the conversation we've been having for the last 20 minutes, if you first turn up to a place, intelligence gathering isn't actively searching for the person, no.
No. If that's the first thing you do, then effectively you've notified the community that the TRG wants to arrest the offender.
Well, it's actively searching for apprehension, isn't it?
Actively searching for apprehension.
If you're actively going to houses, knocking on door, looking for, and you're actively searching for the person for apprehension.
Your Honour, I'm going to turn to a new topic, which is the events of the 9th. We started late, but I know at the time I'm in Your Honour's hands.
Let's go a bit longer. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, more than happy.
I'm going to come to the 9th of November in just a moment, if I might, Sergeant. But just quickly, you're aware that there was an attempted arrest on the 6th of November.
Yes.
At any point...
Oh, sorry, I wouldn't say attempted arrest. I was aware there was an incident where 2 members were threatened with an axe.
A relatively serious incident.
Yes.
We call it the axe incident.
Oh, the axe incident, okay, yep.
At any point between the 6th and 9th of November, to your knowledge, was the TRG contacted or informed of the axe incident?
No, they weren't.
Had a request come through to the TRG, do you have a sense of whether you would have authorised the TRG to deploy?
Well, I wouldn't have authorised them.
That wouldn't have been your responsibility.
No, the authorisation comes from our superintendent.
I see. I guess what I'm asking is that the type of job that the TRG might have assisted in?
Yes.
Okay. And whether or not the TRG did assist would depend on the risk assessment that you undertook at the time?
Yeah, so even if it came back as a general support task, the would have been the superintendent saying you've been requested to go, what's your capacity? And if we had capacity to attend, then we would have gone.
You said a moment ago that one of the biggest problems in the Northern Territory is the tyranny of distance.
Yes.
I take it at that time that the TRG was physically based in Darwin, is that right?
Yeah, we're all based in Darwin. We're only based in Darwin.
What sort of thinking would you need to do before, or would the superintendent need to do before deciding to deploy the TRG to a remote area of Central Australia?
So one of the first things the superintendent thinks about is the capacity to respond to other high-risk incidents. And then it's back to the OIC to provide that advice saying, look, we've got people interstate on a course, we've got a training course we're running which has a significant impact on us, or it might be a case we've got other operations happening. And he might go, well, that's not as important, stop that, do this, under consultation with the OIC. But 9 times out of 10, I would say it comes down to manning. If we have enough in town to implement a high-risk capacity, then we will always try to send people to go and help where we can.
The IRT has since been disbanded, but can you remember if back in 2019 there was consideration of whether the TRG should go or whether it was a job that you could just send the IRT to? Did the availability of the IRT factor into your decision about whether to send the TRG?
For this incident or any incident?
Just generally.
Yeah, if we've used IRT to assist with close personal protection jobs because they are trained, and some of them are trained in that. So we had a search and rescue incidents, we've asked them to come and help along. But noting in fact they were a part-time unit and they had other roles and responsibilities within Alice Springs. So if Alice Springs had operations on and they needed those members, then we would see if they could assist if they're on days off. There's a whole range of complications. But yeah, so we thought they could bolster our unit and be an assistance, we would ask. And we've had operations down here for violent offenders and we have had them come along and assist us on operations.
Do you have a sense of whether, if you had received a call on the 6th or between the 6th and the 9th, asking for TRG support, do you have a sense of whether you might have said, actually just leave it to the IRT? Or is that impossible to answer in hindsight?
I can't recall the staffing. I think we would have gone. I think, only because I know the seriousness of the offence, but if they wouldn't call us unless they want us to go. I guess that'll be my answer. If they rang us and say, no, that's an IRT problem, we wouldn't normally do that. We would say, look, we'll send a couple of guys down. If you can give us some IRT members to bolster that team, that'd be ideal. But it wasn't often that I can't recall any incident actually, other part than a search and rescue incident where we said, no, that's an IRT job, that you deal with it.
So the sense is, if you had been asked, you probably would have sent at least a couple of members.
I'm pretty confident we've been asked that job, we would have sent a team, yes.
And that's from looking at the video of the accidents.
It's hard to say, Your Honour. I've had incidents where they've come and just rang up, said, we've gone to an incident, we've had some spears chucked at the members, we've had a police vehicle damaged, can you come, we want you to go out, and we'll just go. And we've gone, and Port Keats, all throughout Arnhem Land, we've just gone. Having seen the WebOC report of 2 members threatened with an axe, and they asked us to go, then it would be a definite yes, we'll come. Purely for the fact the propensity for violence against the police in that instance and our capacity to use less lethal means, which your frontline doesn't have, would have been a added advantage.
I want to ask you some questions now about the 9th of November. You were the on-call tactical commander for the TRG.
That's correct.
What is the on-call tactical commander?
So the tactical commander is in charge of all tactics at a high-risk incident. So they answer directly to the forward commander. They're in charge of all TRG members and operations, tasks and capability. So
Before we go to the 9th, sorry, I'm interrupting.
Yep.
You mentioned less lethal means. What do you mean by that?
So we have a range of less lethal impact munitions and chemical munitions that we can use on people or crowds to control them, so to speak. So we have the beanbag shotgun, we have the pepper ball, 40mm munitions, and they have a range of impact munitions which strike people in a less lethal capacity. And then we have a combination of impact with chemical agents such as OC or capsicum spray or CSB and tear gas that we can use. And
CSB and tear gas.
Don't ask me to pronounce a letter of about 41 letters.
You mentioned the pepper ball.
Yes.
What is the pepper ball?
So the pepper ball is an air-operated system that has projectiles that can, by being hit with it, it causes pain, or you can have parva rounds, which is a chemically induced OC capsicum spray. So when they get hit, they get effect of an agent, which affects their visibility and their capability to be aggressive.
Now, I think you said that the tactical commander reported directly to the forward commander.
Yes.
When you received a telephone call at 7:45 p.m. from Acting Commander Sean Gill.
That's correct.
And did he, well, I might just ask you this, what did he tell you?
He said there'd been a police shooting in Yuendamu. He says, start putting your mind together about deploying. And I said, are we going now? And he says, not yet, but highly likely. So it's basically just a heads up that this has just come in. So he's obviously just found out. Think about it and start getting in your head how you're going to respond to this.
I think you then had a later telephone call, is that right?
Yeah, he called, I can't recall how much later. It says, you're going, get going, pretty much.
And I think it's in that telephone call that he might have told you who the forward commander was.
Oh, no. I think I asked, and I think he said Sergeant Frost is on the ground, and I think they were talking about sending resources from Alice Springs. So it wasn't until I got to the air wing or to the airport that I think I got told who the forward commander would be, which was Terry Zhang on his way out. But he wasn't on the ground then.
So is it fair to say, and I'm just reading from your statement, that in that first phone call you were told that Constable Rolfe had left the community, but OIC Yuendamu Sergeant Julie Frost was the police forward commander, and there were extra resources heading in?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I just ask you about the concept of forward commander?
Yes.
Is that a concept that's well understood within the police service?
I think the term and the responsibility is one understood. I think we are lacking a little bit in relation to understanding the role and the confidence undertaking the role. But everybody knows who the forward commander is. We get taught that from college when we go through the academy and in our ongoing operations of the forward commander. We see it in all planned operations such as the V8 supercars, New Year's Eve operations, or football carnival operation. It'll be clearly on the operations order who the forward commander is, and that person is responsible for everything.
So it is taught to recruits?
Yes. Yes.
Is the police forward commander occasionally called the incident controller, or is that a different role?
No, so what happened was we used to run off NTICS, and we've now changed to ICCS Plus, which is a management system. And NTICS with AIMS, and AIMS is a management system for emergency management like cyclones and floods, and that's used across Australia. And they refer to the person charged as incident controller. With ICCS Plus, we're referring to police-specific operations, in which case it's the forward commander. So there was a bit of confusion for a period of time, incident controllers, forward commanders, operation commanders, but ideally an incident controller, if it was referred to in a police perspective, is still the forward commander. It's just a different name. The role, the title, the responsibilities are exactly the same.
Okay. And so at least at the time that it was authored, I'll leave that, you're on. Now,
in this case, and I'm not sure, and I might not have read everything properly, but there was, I understand, a forward commander in Yuendamu, and there were other people who had the title of incident controller either in Alice Springs or Darwin.
Yeah, so I would take them as the operations commander. So I guess the easiest way to explain it, Your Honour, the forward commander is on scene. The forward commander is right at the coalface of the incident, seeing everything in front of them, making decisions which directly affect the people in front of them. The operations commander sitting back is thinking about that incident and anything that incident can cause issues greater wide or extra resources to assist on the ground and the background work. The operations commander is still in charge of the whole incident, but you would be rare that the operations commander would reach in and tell the forward commander how to do a job unless it had impact greater from that scene, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter if other people are calling themselves incident controllers. Everyone on the ground would understand that the person in charge in Yuendamu is the forward controller, and that is the sergeant of the station.
Well, yes.
At that time.
At that time would have been Sergeant Frost, yes.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to take you through step by step your very detailed statutory declaration. I'll just ask you a couple of questions about specific parts of it.
If you don't mind, is that 7-77? that you're referring to?
It is, yes.
Thank you.
Over the next hour or so, you had a number of conversations with Sean Gill, Acting Senior Sergeant Neil Mellon. Can I just ask you who Neil Mellon was?
So Neil Mellon was the acting OSC at that time.
Of the TRG?
Of the TRG, yes.
Now, you became aware that the air wing was not available. Can you tell us about issues surrounding the availability of the air wing and how that affects TRG deployments?
So, Your Honour, the Police Air Wing has an exemption to obviously carry police with firearms and less lethal munitions and chemical munitions. They have a CASA exemption. Private Air Wing doesn't. And we have had issues in the past at times when either the planes are down for servicing or we are out of pilot hours. And I think, and don't quote me, but I think that night the pilot was out of hours and that they'd done enough flying. They needed to have regulated rest before they could fly, and the plane wasn't available till 7 o'clock the next morning.
And I think you said one of the consequences when the air wing is not available can be that you can't take chemical munitions with you.
Yes, correct, yeah.
So they're things like tear gas and OC spray.
Yes.
And how does that affect, if at all, your operational capability once you hit the ground?
So chemical munitions provide us the ability to control crowds. It's an option that we can use, and also includes smoke. Sometimes we may deploy a smoke grenade first to see where the wind goes or to move a crowd back before we actually use an agent on them. But by not taking that, it limits our capacity to deploy that if we have to for public safety, for the community and for us. And I was extremely conscious of that when we went down.
Now, you reached Hardy's Aviation at around about 9:30 p.m. Does that sound right?
Correct.
And you say in your statement that you were flying down with 6 members of the TRG.
The on-call team, yes.
And that Sergeant Smith Lester was nominated as the team leader.
He was the on-call team leader, yes.
Okay. So even though you, the tactical commander, were deploying with the TRG, the command structure had a team leader. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And in your statement you say that at around about 11 p.m. you took off.
Yeah,
I think it was
11 minutes.
10:58 p.m.
Okay.
Before you took off, Your Honour, this material is not on the brief. During proofing, the witness identified a number of further videos that I've not viewed, and I don't propose to play them now because I haven't seen them, but I will identify them. Did you turn your body-worn footage on at the Hardy's Aviation hangar?
Yes, I did.
And why did you do that?
I wanted to record all the information I had at that time. I wanted to record my appreciation process of all the concerns I had and what my future planning was. So I could, one, just walk through all my options, the course of actions open to what may happen to the community and the course of actions open to police and to TRG.
And some of those courses of actions would be things like contingencies. If then we'll do this.
Yes, definitely.
And they might include things that you sincerely hope won't happen, but need to think about just in case they do happen.
Yeah, so part of the appreciation process, I'm thinking to the worst case scenario that more lethal force is being used or police officers are being seriously injured and killed, right through to the point we turn up there and it's a matter of just engaging with them, nothing happening. So I'm thinking of every single thing that could occur. So I'm prepping myself that if something was to occur, then I've sort of like got an understanding of how I could implement something to prevent getting there and to identify the triggers happening that we're moving down to a stage that this could be really bad. What can I do beforehand? And it allows me to identify things when you're overwhelmed with so much sensory overload of things happening. I can just refer, I've already thought about that, I was going to do this.
And are you going through that process just for your own clarity of thought, or are you communicating that to other people when you're recording that?
I'm doing it just to myself, but I'm doing it for this very reason why I'm sitting here today. So I've given evidence in coronial matters before, and I was in a position where I wasn't able to take detailed notes because of the urgency of deployment. And one of the points when I was being spoken to by the coroner and the internal investigation was I provided good information on my decision making, but it was post-event. And they were saying it's not worth anything. You need to provide information on what you're thinking at the time, the information you have at the time. And at that time, the commander and superintendent suggested some options, and one of them was just recording on your phone, which I did. And then once we started using body worn, I started using body worn a lot to say, this is what I know, this is what I think, this is what problems I have, this is my options open to me, this is what I want to fix, or this is what I need to know when I get on the ground. So it's just putting it all out there to show that I'm thinking about all those options, and if I never deployed one, could be a reason, but why did you think of it? Well, I did, and it showed me why beforehand.
Is that something that you train when you were training leaders, team leaders, about making critical decisions?
Definitely. It's something I strongly encourage to anyone I speak to in a leadership role, even frontline from Casuarina to the TRG to the Fireys when I was doing the lesson with them last week.
And I think you've talked a little bit about it allowing you to capture your thought process, but does it also allow you to capture emotion or things of that nature?
It does, especially if you're in a position where at the scene and you're doing that and you're under an immense amount of pressure, especially if you haven't been trained in it. You can see how rattled or how affected you are by that, and then you go back and says, well, you didn't take effective leadership, you didn't make critical decisions, why not? And you look at this person and this person's shaking, they can't put two words together, they're trying to talk to people, and you can see, look at how stressed that person is. That's no wonder they couldn't make those decisions or that. It also, the reason I like it also, it allows you to switch on. It says, right, you're in the game now, this is what's happening, you've got a really serious incident in front of you, so switch on, put all that issues you've had at home, previous work or other things away, focus on this, and by voicing all those concerns, you sort of like switch on and get into that mode of, from either tactical commander or as a team leader.
A lot of self-reflection and reflection, shared reflection in amongst the team at the TRG by the sound of things.
There is, and I've shown some videos to team leaders or jobs I've done, and then we'll go through an incident, and the good and bad. And the other thing I like about it, Your Honour, is that I've been in incidents where I've been told, why didn't you act on that? I said, well, I didn't know about it. And they said, yes, you did, we told you. I said, well, my body worn's gone through all the information I have at the hand and what I'm making my decisions on. If I had known that, I would have mentioned it. Now, it could have been a case that you told me and I was just so overwhelmed I didn't pick up on it. It could have been a case you told someone else and you told me I didn't hear it, or you didn't tell me. So it counts for your decision making at that time with the information you have at present. So that's a really big advantage of why I use it.
What role are you in now?
I'm just a Casuarina supervisor. Yeah, well, I'm been acting as watch commander at the communications centre lately.
As you were flying, I take it you lost reception for a little while.
For most of the trip, yes.
I want to ask you about your perception of risk in the move. Can you tell Your Honour something about what you perceive the risks to be?
For this incident, it was pretty high, I must admit. I wasn't stressed, but I was extremely concerned. I've been down to Unamu, I think it was 2010, for the riots down there. Obviously working out of Springs and being out to Unamu for other civil disturbances when I was in general duties in Alice Springs. With a police shooting and one of the community being killed, it could go either way. It could have gone to the point where, as it happened, we had good, effective communication with the community and we've moved on to where we are now. It could be the case where they turn up to the police station, or we could have confrontation which could lead to an extremely violent matter. I was concerned as to whether we could even get on the airstrip. I've been to operations where we've had people at an airstrip with a firearm waiting for us. We've been, or they put obstacles on the airstrip so when the police plane would land, it'd probably crash. So I wasn't even confident we would even get to Unamu that night. And then once I got there, and I had no visibility of what had happened from the time I left to the time I was over, that what could have happened. I could have been flying into a riot, or could have been flying into nothing, or could have been flying into another shooting. It was just in limbo, and I'll deal with what I have at the time, but there was a real potential that it was going to get confrontational. I was extremely concerned about that.
You've told Her Honour a little bit about prior experiences in Unamu in 2010. You've written about them in your statutory declaration. I won't ask you any more questions about that. But had you been told anything by anyone during your various conversations about what the level of risk might be?
So I'm not understanding the question. Before I left from people, or
Yeah, before you got on the plane, had anyone told you, look, we're worried that people will break into the police station, or we're worried that there's a crowd, or...
I had a conversation with Superintendent Gill before we got on, and he said there is some talk about them evacuating Yuendamu and just leaving. And I said, I don't think that's a good idea. He agreed with me. But that was still been a conversation that was still being had. But other than the risk, I guess I've worked with Superintendent Gill for a lot of time. I've known him as when he came to the unit as a sergeant. I worked under him as an OIC. He's a mentor, he's a good friend, and we have a high level of trust between each other. And I wouldn't expect him to tell me, this is really risky, this is really bad. He would know. I know that. And when we were talking about options and how we were doing things, they never really come up because we both understood the seriousness of the situation straight away.
Did you speak to Sergeant Frost at all before you left?
No, I didn't.
Is there any reason why you didn't?
I guess, from speaking to Superintendent Gill and Acting Senior Sergeant Neil Mell at that stage, I got everything I needed, and I knew there was going to be changes from the time I left till I got down there. So even if I spoke to her, what she told me now isn't going to be relevant in 2.5 hours when I land. I was confident with the information I received from Superintendent Gill that I had what I needed. And if I rang her, I would also be conscious that she is busy. There is a lot to do and she would be trying to manage that. The last thing she needs is me ringing, hey, what's going on? What's happening there? So there's a lot, get off the phone, I'm busy. So I wasn't going to take that away from her when I didn't think anything she should give me would be relevant. I had an understanding who was there, I had an understanding of the community, I had an understanding of the seriousness of the situation, and I had an understanding what my role was. And I anticipated to potentially communicate with Superintendent Knowles before we landed, to get a bit of an update before we landed, which I did, because I wanted confirmation the airstrip was clear before we land, and I knew I'd get a bit of a heads up, but no, sorry, Your Honour, I didn't think about it.
On the plane, it was written about your thought processes on the plane, and you say that you thought that this was going to be more challenging than most responses to, for example, a riot or a family fight, for example. And you say this, by police shooting someone in the community, or the focus was on police as opposed to a family, etc., and police being the mediator. I was extremely conscious of this fact and how we, brackets, police and TRG, close brackets, reacted would set the foundation of police in this district for many years to come. What did you mean by that?
Well, 90%, all the operations I've been to have been because there was unrest in the community due to family matters. So the focus wasn't on police for the cause of that, the focus on police was trying to resolve it peacefully or otherwise. In this instance, we'd caused the unrest. So all the focus of all the families are now onto police. So because they're onto us, then it's how we behave and how we move forward would dictate how things would happen afterwards. So if we had, for example, gone down there, been involved in a violent confrontation and more people in the community had been injured, then how are we supposed to build that rapport with the community and move ahead with that when they say, you've hurt us again or hurt us more? And we were always going to move on from this. The thing was that there are still cops who have to live in that community, be part of that community, and we didn't want to be a point where it made it harder for them. I guess, you happy with that, Your Honour? I can expand on that a little bit more, but I think I've given the point.
Another time, that will include Germany. Thanks.
All stand. Temporarily.
There we go.